After Israel's announced recognition to the breakaway Somaliland region in Somalia sparked fury across the region, the Arab League moved swiftly, calling for an emergency meeting in Cairo for its permanent delegates to plan how the Arab bloc will rally support to its member state Somalia.
Somalia called for the emergency meeting, which for the most part was held behind closed doors.
This is a hostile and provocative act that we categorically reject in its entirety. It constitutes a flagrant and unprecedented violation of international law, UN resolutions, and the charters of the Arab League and the African Union. After the war of extermination the Israeli occupation waged against the brotherly Palestinian people, it is now working to support a separatist entity in Somalia in pursuit of the forced displacement of the Palestinian people from their land.
Most people have never heard of this place, yet in just days, a small region in Africa has forced world powers to pick sides, triggered emergency diplomatic statements, and shaken one of the most sensitive trade corridors on Earth. This isn't a civil war. It's not a coup, it's a recognition battle, one that threatens to redraw alliances between Africa, the Middle East, and the world's superpowers. At the center is Somaliland, a territory sitting beside one of the busiest shipping routes on the planet. What's happening here isn't just about borders. It's about power, ports, military access, and who controls the future of the Red Sea, and the consequences could reach far beyond Africa.
Few shifts in global politics arrive with little warning, and even fewer emerge from places long considered peripheral to world affairs. Yet from the Horn of Africa, a small and largely unrecognized territory has ignited a diplomatic crisis that is now rippling across Africa, the Middle East, and the world's major power centers. Somaliland, a self-declared republic in northern Somalia, has suddenly moved from the margins of international diplomacy to its center, exposing fault lines in global alliances and raising urgent questions about sovereignty, security, and power in a rapidly changing world. Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991, after the collapse of the Somali state and years of civil war. While it has never received formal international recognition, it has operated for more than 3 decades with its own government, constitution, elections, security forces, and currency. In contrast to Somalia's prolonged instability, Somaliland has maintained relative peace and internal order, a record that has increasingly drawn the attention of foreign governments and investors. What was once viewed as a frozen political dispute has now become a live geopolitical issue. The reason this territory matters goes far beyond its borders. Somaliland sits along the Gulf of Aden, close to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. A significant portion of global trade and energy shipments passes through this narrow corridor, linking the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. Any political shift affecting this area immediately raises concerns in global capitals about supply chains, shipping security, and energy flows. As instability increases elsewhere along the Red Sea, Somaliland's location has transformed it into a strategic prize. Recent diplomatic moves involving Somaliland have triggered sharp reactions because they challenge long-standing principles of territorial integrity, particularly in Africa. Somalia's federal government views any engagement that resembles recognition as a direct violation of its sovereignty. For Mogadishu, the fear is not only the loss of territory but the precedent it could set, potentially encouraging further fragmentation in a region already vulnerable to conflict. Across Africa, reactions have been cautious and divided. The African Union has historically opposed changes to colonial-era borders, arguing that stability depends on preserving existing states, even when their internal cohesion is weak. Publicly, most African governments continue to support Somalia's territorial claims. Privately, however, some policymakers acknowledge that Somaliland represents a unique case, a functioning political system that has endured for decades without international support. This quiet debate reflects a deeper tension within African diplomacy between legal principles and political realities. The Middle East has responded with particular intensity. The Horn of Africa has become an extension of Middle Eastern strategic competition as Gulf states expand their influence through port investments, military partnerships, and trade agreements along the Red Sea. Any shift in Somaliland's status has implications for regional rivalries, especially at a time when control of maritime routes and coastal infrastructure has become a central security concern. Several Arab states have warned that recognition or deep diplomatic engagement could destabilize the region and upset existing balances of power. Global powers are approaching the issue with calculated caution. The United States and European countries have long praised Somaliland's stability and democratic practices, yet they remain reluctant to take steps that could undermine Somalia's internationally recognized government. At the same time, growing insecurity in the Red Sea and increasing competition with rival powers are forcing Western policymakers to reassess their strategic priorities. Somaliland's ports and airfields offer logistical advantages that are difficult to ignore in an era of strained global supply chains. China has reaffirmed its support for Somalia's territorial integrity, consistent with its broader opposition to separatist movements worldwide. Beijing's extensive investments across Africa make it particularly sensitive to precedents that could encourage similar claims elsewhere. Russia, meanwhile, is watching closely, viewing the situation through the lens of global power rivalry and the opportunity to expand influence in regions where Western positions appear uncertain. Beneath the diplomatic statements lies a complex web of strategic, economic, and security interests. Somaliland's Berbera port has emerged as a key logistics hub, offering alternative access to global markets for landlocked African countries and new options for international trade. Military planners see value in the territory's coastline and infrastructure at a time when naval deployments are increasing across the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Energy security, too, is part of the equation, as the Horn of Africa sits astride routes vital to global oil and gas transport. The consequences of this dispute extend beyond Africa. As Middle Eastern powers deepen their engagement in the Horn and global superpowers compete for influence, Somaliland has become a focal point where African, Arab, and international interests intersect. Alliances are being tested, and traditional diplomatic positions are under pressure. For African states, the issue raises uncomfortable questions about governance, legitimacy, and the future of borders drawn decades ago. For global powers, it highlights how regional stability is increasingly tied to seemingly small political decisions. What happens next remains uncertain. Somalia is unlikely to soften its stance, and the African Union is expected to continue emphasizing unity and territorial integrity. Yet it is equally clear that Somaliland can no longer be ignored. Its strategic location, political stability, and growing international engagement have pushed it onto the global stage at a moment of heightened geopolitical tension. In a world defined by shifting power balances and fragile supply chains, this development serves as a reminder that global diplomatic earthquakes do not always begin in major capitals or at international summits. Sometimes, they start in places long overlooked. Somaliland's rise as a geopolitical flashpoint signals that the Horn of Africa will play an increasingly important role in shaping global diplomacy. And the world will be watching closely as this small region continues to influence far larger forces.